Welcome, y'all. We got episode number 10 in process. Not sure. Welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. I hope that you got lots out of last episode about becoming the CEO of your life. This week, I want to touch about a really profound tool that I've used in my life and my journey of really coming back to my truth and coming back to myself and creating the most profound life that I don't have words for. And one of those tools is coming into pattern recognition. So it's all about autopilots. So the autopilots that we're on that we're not really aware of, and then looking at what those patterns and what those autopilots are, and looking at what effects those patterns have actually had on our lives. And once we can kind of sit with the effects and being like, whoa, these are some pretty full-on effects that it's had on my life, we can then start to really balance these effects. And by balancing these effects, we can start to really tap into our responsibility and tap into our power, tap into our truth, tap into our integrity, tap into our heart. And we can start from there to really lead a life that is so in alignment to what it is that we want it to look like, but more importantly, what we want our life to feel like. And from there, we can also start to really look at what are we actually making ourselves available for in our life? What are we actually allowing to be tolerated into our life? And we can start to really step into that power. And it's been such a profound tool inside of my life that I really, really want to share with you today. So we're going to talk about a couple of examples as we go through, and I'm going to give a couple of examples of some common patterns that are inside of the society around. And then we're going to look at the effects, and then we're going to look at how we can then start to really balance these effects. So as the week now approaches, it's really cool and it's really powerful. And I really invite you to start to just observe your life. And I invite you to really get super curious. And then, like we spoke about in the last episode, is coming back into that bird's eye view of looking down at your life and seeing the patterns and the autopilots that we are on. And these autopilots and these patterns that we're on, they can be on so many different levels. They can be, down to the way that we hold ourselves, down to our thinking patterns of like, what's the first thoughts that we do, that we go to revert to first thing in the morning. And we can start to look at what our language are and how we hold ourselves inside of that. And then we can look at, the bigger patterns, which is like our people pleasing and following other people. And then we can take that even deeper and we can look at the limiting beliefs that are below our self-sabotaging behaviors and what patterns is actually driving those behaviors. So there's different levels inside of the pattern recognition. By just stepping into that power of actually just identifying the patterns can have such a profound effect as it is, because at the end of the day, it is up to us to really stand in our truth and take responsibility for our lives. And it's up to us whether we choose to allow that pattern to keep playing out that we're on, the autopilot that we're on, or we can start to step into our power and start to balance it and really start to change this and step into a new identity or a new version of ourselves that is in true alignment with who we are. And like I've spoken to a lot inside of the previous episodes, it's coming back to that truth that's inside of us, our true north inside of us, our essence, our inner wisdom, our intuition, our soul, whatever it is that we want to call it. There is something inside of us that is constantly guiding us towards what is more in alignment to our truth. And when we start to really get still, and when we start to get quiet, and when we start to go deep, and when we start to reflect, we can start to really access that heart-led soul purpose, that alignment that's inside of all of us. It's a part of us that we're born with as a baby. And as we grow up, and as we go through certain experience inside of our lives, if we go through certain traumas with a small t, a big T, it can be a certain comment that have been given to us or been said to us inside of our life, then we create this persona that we tend to live on. We start to live from this identity that's not really who we are. And inside of that identity and inside of that persona, there is certain patterns and autopilots that we're Sometimes we can be consciously aware of it, but sometimes it's very unconscious behaviors, which is stored in our subconscious mind, which we have spoken about in previous episodes. So today is all about bringing the awareness forward and really recognizing the patterns and recognizing the patterns and the programming of our subconscious mind and how we can start to take the smaller steps of actually balancing it. So it's a really, really cool tool. So let's start with just working through a couple of examples. So for example, people pleasing. People pleasing is such a common pattern that a lot of people are on. And I speak from my own experience inside of the people pleasing realm. I am a recovering people pleaser aholic, people pleasing aholic, if that's a word. And it was something that was a pattern that was very ingrained in me. And it's something that I work on every day as well. And it's something that to be really aware of as well. Like we can start to recognize the patterns and seeing how the effects are and how they're playing out. But it's also a constant journey in this realm of things. Like it's a constant transformation. It's a constant steps that I have to put into place to be able to keep into my truth and stepping into that power and not allowing that pattern to still affect my life. So it's one thing to recognize it, but then it's also about that action and implementation of what we're actually doing to balance the effects of the pattern and what steps we're actually putting into place to be able to come back to our truth and what it is that actually feels right to us. So people pleasing being the pattern. Then if we're looking at, so people pleasing is all about putting other people's needs before our own. We're not really listening to what it is we need. And it's an exhausting pattern to be in because we're constantly neglecting our own needs and we're just being back in call to all the people that are out there. And we're just, putting ourselves last pretty much. That's the big scope, I guess, of people pleasing. So then if we look at that pattern of being on that autopilot of constantly people pleasing and putting other people's needs before our own and always being there and back and call, what are the actual effects that has had on our life by being in that pattern? So that could be that, not speaking our truth, we're suppressing our emotions, we're neglecting our needs. And, it's so many effects that people pleasing has on our life, and it can lead to burnout. It can lead to exhaustion. And also looking at people pleasing, we can look at the effects by people pleasing in like all the different areas of our life. It could be a relationship, it can be friendship, it can be career, it can be inside of our finances. Like there's so many modalities that people pleasing takes form inside of. Like it's not just like, like saying yes to the invite of a friend or an event and saying yes, but we don't really want to go. That's one part of it. But people pleasing has such a profound effect on so many different areas of our lives. So if we then break down the effects that people pleasing has had inside of these, it's just, whoa, it makes you kind of like, oh my God, I've been putting myself last. Like no wonder that I'm feeling so tired all the time, that I'm exhausted. And the effects of people pleasing, for example, it can literally go into the extent of disease. It can go into the extent of pain inside of our bodies. It can go into the extent of having super inflamed bodies. It can go into the extent of having, carrying a lot of weight. It can go into the extent of not having proper sleeping patterns. Like there's so much things that the effects that people pleasing actually has on ourselves. Like if we just sit with that for a minute, it's just like, whoa, like that's how much, if we're putting other people's needs in front of our own in all these different areas, of the effects that actually impacts our own health, our own well-being. And if we speak about the importance of our life, like our life that we're living, it's a big fucking deal. Like we spoke about in the previous episode of stepping into that, becoming the CEO of your life, right? Like it's, our life is a big deal. And these patterns of people pleasing, it's a pattern that we're actually allowing inside of our life. And we are actually allowing those effects inside of our life. We're allowing that to take place and we're allowing that to happen to us. Like when I sat with that, I was like, holy smokes, like this is insane. So then if we really sit with that and you really embody those effects that patterns have had on your life, then how can we now start to balance those effects? Because we can allow that pattern to keep moving forward. We can allow that autopilot to be there. But unless we actually lean into making changes and taking a responsibility of this pattern and being the responsible adult that we are and reparenting ourselves inside of this pattern and inside of this behavior, it's not until then that we can actually start to make changes. And then also realizing that these patterns have played out for X amount of time. So it's not going to be a quick fix of listening to this episode and being like, oh, yep, I'm a people pleaser. So I'm going to start to, like put my needs first and speak up and do all those things. Like, it has so much more depth to it. So it takes time to really dissolve patterns like this. And like I mentioned before, it's something that I work on even to this day, of, really tuning into myself before I respond to something. Like, is that something that I actually want to do? Or like, hang on a second, do I want to reply to that message straight away? Like, is that actually inside of my boundaries? Is that, so it's really tapping into that. So really sitting into those balancing effects is literally the first step, is exactly what we're doing now. So it's just recognizing the pattern, recognizing the patterns of the effects, and just sitting with that. And then just starting super, super small. So it could be like, a friend inviting you to an event, and you might be like, okay, let me just check in with myself for a minute. Is this something that I truly want to do? And then you sit with that, you get quiet, you tune in, and then you just, over time, you just start to listen to what it is that you actually want to do, and you start to speak accordingly. And the same with the people pleasing realm of like, okay, so how can I actually start to speak up in certain situations? Like for example, relationships. Like, I used to have this pattern of like relationships, I had to keep everything in balance. Like, I can't have any conflicts, I can't have any disagreement, everything needs to be sweet. And I used to like tiptoe around. I used to make sure that my partner was always good, people pleasing, make sure that they're happy, make sure it's all good, at the detriment of my own feelings and my own health. And I was too scared to actually speak up, because I would rather people please and keep them happy rather than actually expressing how I was feeling. And that led to a lot of conflict inside of my body. So then it might just be like starting super small, of just being like, hey, sitting down with your partner and just being like, hey, I have something that I would like to communicate to you. I have something that I would just like to express. Is that okay? Can you hold that space for me as I would like to talk to you about this, whatever it is, right? Or so it's just starting super small and just building on that. And the more that we start that and just expressing our needs and really stepping into our own power and listening to what it is that we truly want, then that will start to have more profound ripple effects of our life. And we will start to come back to our truth, because the more that we suppress our truth, and the more that we suppress our essence, and the more that we suppress who it is that we truly are, and the stuff that wants to come out of us and that we want to say, that stuff causes disease inside of our body, literally. And I've shared this on social media, and it's actually one of the posts that gets the most likes and attention, or whatever we want to call it, is the ones where I show how my body has changed throughout this journey. That I've ticked all the boxes for many, many years: nutrition, sleep, movement, and all these things. And the weight reduction and the inflammation, my body has come back to its true self. Like, I can just see me again. I'm like, hey, there you are, I can see you now. And this is by doing this stuff. And it doesn't have to be this extravagant 180-degree turn your life upside down. It literally starts with just recognizing and putting these small steps into place that has the most profound effect on our life when we really start to come back to our truth. Another pattern that I've worked a lot with inside of my life is following. It's following what other people are doing, and constantly being on that autopilot mode of like, I'm not really sure what I want to do, but I'm just going to keep following, and I will keep following in other people's footsteps, or I will keep working up the ladder at work, or I will keep just not really sure what I want my life to look like, but I will keep following what other people are doing. And that caused a lot of havoc in my life, a lot, especially because from my upbringing, I knew that there was a bigger life there for me. I spent 3 years on a boat sailing from Sweden to Australia, which I share with you guys on Instagram. And from coming back into the rat wheel after having had that experience, I started to fall into this autopilot of following what other people were doing. And inside of me, it was causing so much conflict. That's the effects of the pattern. Like, it caused so much conflict because I was following and I wasn't living in alignment to the life that I would like to live. that was the side effects of that. So when I started to balance those effects and I actually started to tap into, hang on a second, this is not the life that I want to live. I don't want to live in a burnout state. I don't want to live in the 9-to-5 realm. I don't want to do that. Like that's not what I want. And doesn't feel good in my body. So it's like, okay, so how can you start to balance the effects? Like what action steps are you actually taking to then create a life that makes sense to you? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take, like, it's an implementation. It takes action. It takes speaking up. There's so many things and steps that goes into really breaking free from these patterns. But it doesn't have to be a huge thing of turning your life upside down. It can just start with these small little steps of actually tuning in to what feels right to you. Another pattern that I really want to share with you is misery feeds misery, which I had in a beautiful conversation with my mentor this week. And we were talking about these. And this is actually a very common one inside of society of like, you ask someone how they are, be like, how are you? What's going on in your life? Oh, I'm so busy. I'm so exhausted and things are so tiring and I'm working all the time and I'm not happy with my work and whatever, like all this just like negative stuff, like misery type energy stuff, and misery feeds misery. So then your pattern response might be like, oh my God, same. Like, I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. I don't even know how I'm going to get through tomorrow. And I just seem like, I don't know. Like, it's just like fucked. Right. So then it's like, okay, but that is actually a pattern that we actually choose to buy into. And what are the effects of that pattern of misery feeding misery, of actually you allowing yourself to feed into that conversation of misery and going down to that level of sitting in that victimhood, of actually buying into those stories and actually making yourself available for that type of conversation? Like, that is a choice that we buy into. So what are the effects that has actually had on your life, and what are the effects that actually has on you? Like, what if you have those type of conversations, how does that make you feel? If you start your day with going into the office, with having those type of conversations, how does that set you up for the day? Do you feel really empowered and fucking ready to go for the day? Or do you feel like you want to just go back to bed and pull the blanket over your head and just being like, fuck life, I hate my life? And that is a choice that we buy into those conversations, those stories. It's like, okay, so how can I start to balance those effects? Well, I'm not going to make myself available to those conversations anymore. I'm actually going to start to speak up inside of this conversation and actually talk about what's actually really good in my life. If I walk into a room now and someone asks me how I am, I'm like, I am fucking amazing. Life is so fucking good. I am so in alignment. I'm living my purpose. Life is great. My relationship's on fire. I have the most amazing life. I live at the fucking beach. I've just bought a beachfront property. Like, life's amazing. But what happens also inside of that with balancing those effects is also, which we will go into, it's an identity. We have to let go of a certain identity. And when we go into that energy, it also causes, I guess, like a bit of, not conflict, that's not the right word, but it causes like a judgment. It's a sense of like, it's quite common for the energy to kind of change. And the people that are sitting in this misery type communication, they'll be like, oh, like, have you seen her? Like, oh my God, like, what is she on about? Like, she's too positive. Like, what's that going on? But what's happening actually from that point of view, though, is that the people that are judging your life, if you're saying of how amazing your life is, they're judging your life because of their own insecurities. Right? So they're judging your life of being amazing because they can see the potential that they have inside of you, but they're not doing anything about it. So therefore, it's easier to sit there and judge and just do that instead of actually taking action and stepping into your potential. So with balancing these effects, so let's go into the identity realm that we have to let go of inside of this too. So when we've been on a certain pattern, when we've been on a certain autopilot, we have a particular identity that we are aligned to inside of those autopilots and those patterns. So when we start to balance these effects, it is also letting go of a certain identity. It's letting go of a person that we used to be and stepping into a new version of ourselves. And that can cause, it can be a vulnerable space to be in. It's kind of like an unknown space. And it is a fair bit of, like, we have to navigate a fair bit inside of that space of like, okay, so I'm going to start to balance these effects. So therefore I'm going to have harder conversations. I'm going to have to really show up in a different energy, and it will, like, your life will change in certain areas, but it is for your own good because you're actually starting to step into your truth. And some people will follow you along with that and really be on board with that. And some people will fold, and that's okay. But that's why it's so important to take smaller steps as well inside of this, and actually being super kind and nurturing to yourself inside of this journey of really when you start to really express yourself and balancing these effects. But it is like the most empowering thing that you can do for yourself. Like, I can't express enough of how important it is of us stepping into our potential, stepping into our truth, and really following what is in alignment with us, because our life is a big fucking deal. Like, it's let's just stop looking at our life like it's not a big deal, or like, oh, I'm just going to keep staying or playing small or being on these patterns because, I don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable with being too much, or I don't want to, do this because I'm going to break that person's heart, or I don't want to say too much because I don't want to hurt that person's feelings. Like I've mentioned before in previous episodes, like, people can handle it. Like, we're all adults inside of this world, right? And people can handle it. So let's stop treating people like they're made of porcelain, and then when you say something, they're going to break. Like, people can handle it. And it's so important for us to stand in our truth, because imagine if we have a world where we're all in such big fucking alignment with who it is that we are. We know what we want out of our life. We know what we want it to feel like. And we step into that responsibility of like really taking action inside of our life that is in so much alignment to who we are and what we want our life to feel like and what we want our life to look like. Like, it's such a, I don't have words for it. Like, if we had a world like that, there will be so much love inside of this world. It will be like a whole different energy inside of this planet if we all followed what it was that actually was in our heart and what is truly aligned with who we are, and speaking up and speaking our truth and really doing life the way that we want it, like creating our dream life from that energy, because it's what makes so much fucking sense to ourselves, instead of just playing along and following in other footsteps and people pleasing there and doing all this and buying into those certain conversations. Like, there's so much to it. So I hope that this episode really inspires you this week, and I invite you just to start to recognize the patterns. Just kind of observe what's playing out, observe the conversations that you're like playing into, observe your behaviors, observe how you're reacting to certain situations, and get super curious. Because when we get super curious about our life and how it's playing out, we have so much information and data to work with. And we have the power inside of us to change the reality that we're in. We literally do. We have the power to change the reality that we live in. So I'm going to love you all. I'm going to leave you all with that today. And if you have anything that comes up for you, I would love to hear about it. And yeah, let's have a beautiful week. I see you all out there. I see you all really leaning into this work and really trying to understand yourself better. And I promise you, it's such a profound world to be in. And I'm so glad that you're here. And I see you. All right. We'll be back next week for another episode. Have a beautiful week, y'all. And we'll see you next week.